I'd like to welcome everybody today to this webinar on some regulatory changes that are occurring across the publishing landscape. We're fortunate today to have several people, four different speakers, each with a few minutes of prepared materials in mind. We have Jack Stevens from Woodland Group, who's going to start by talking about what's going on with respect to tariffs, trade, and environmental compliance. Uh, Elizabeth's here from Sylvamo to talk particularly about the paper market, which is where Sylvamo operates. Um, Rachel Comerford from Macmillan Learning will be talking about some of the upcoming changes in accessibility regulations. And we're going to close out with Matthew Baldwin. Matt's going to be talking in particular about some of the things that have given us nightmares over the last year, and the less, particularly EUDR, and some of the things that maybe will give us nightmares in the year to come. So I'd like to turn things over first to Jack Stevens to get us started.
Thank you, Brian. Hopefully the next 5 minutes, not one of those nightmares. So starting with tariffs, which has been a nightmare for us in my industry, certainly. And 2026 so far doesn't look like we're in for a reprieve in the short to medium term anyhow. What we are seeing in 2026, though, so far is a slight change compared to 2025 in that these tariffs are being used more and more as a political tool to address a wide range of foreign policy issues rather than just perceived trade imbalances. And it's this unpredictability about their implementation, which means that we can't be certain that commodities like books and other printed materials that are traditionally exempt from these tariffs will continue to be so. So I think, key word here is unpredictability. So just quickly running through these five that we've already had to deal with in the first month of the year so far. Greenland in the EU, in response to certain EU countries taking exception to the Trump administration's moves around Greenland, the president threatened to implement 10% tariffs beginning in February and rising through to June, up to 25% in June on a host of EU countries. But some negotiations, thankfully, so far have managed to roll these back. So they were not implemented on the 1st of February. Similar in Canada, there was the threat of 100% tariffs on imports to the US of Canadian goods. And this was in response to Canadian negotiations with China. This one's still a bit up in the air. The Canadian deal with China is still up in the air. So kind of watch this space on that one. South Korea, these were more punitive tariffs, where their rate was increased from 15% to 25% in response to South Korea's slow progress in delivering on the investment into the US that was promised last year of part of their negotiated deal and hasn't yet happened. So the US administration following up on, making sure that parties are sticking to the deal that they arranged last year. And with Cuba and Iran, there's tariffs here that go beyond just those countries, but will be applied to countries that continue to trade with Cuba and Iran. Cuba specifically, those that buy Cuban oil, that sell oil to Cuba, and with Iran, countries that trade more generally with Iran, including China, will be subject to, or may be subject to, some future US tariffs. The second part of the tariff landscape at the moment is the pending Supreme Court update that we're waiting for on the challenge to the IEEPA tariffs, which is the International Emergency Powers Act, which is the act that President Trump used to impose some of these tariffs last year. And the main question that the court is looking to answer is, does that act actually authorize the president to impose tariffs, or should these have remained with Congress? If they side with the president, the Supreme Court sides with the president on these, then we carry on as we are. If they disagree with the president's interpretation, then there is the potential for all tariffs raised under the IEEPA program to be refunded. This would be a logistical and administrative nightmare for CBP and the Treasury, and we just don't know. We get kind of snippets, and we hope that there'll be updates soon, but there's still no firm deadline for a resolution from the Supreme Court. In the meantime, what you can do to prepare is make sure that you are set up within ACE, which is the CBP portal, to be able to receive ACH refunds. Previously, customs have issued refunds via check, but going forward from February this week, in fact, they will only be issuing ACH refunds, which is a nice improvement. And the other thing you can do is talk to your customs broker about filing protests on previously submitted entries with customs on your behalf. And what this does is it keeps those entries open, because those entries can liquidate and close a certain number of days after they're originally filed. And once they are closed, even if the Supreme Court allows for these duties to be refunded, if your entry is closed, it will not be eligible. Filing a protest keeps your entry open and eligible for a future refund. In the news in the last couple of weeks, we've seen talk about these two trade routes. The first is the reopening, or the gradual reopening, of the Suez Canal. And you can see from this graph here that when it was first shut at the end of 2023, it's almost 4 or 5 times the volume reduced moving through the Suez Canal. Reopening the Suez Canal would save between 10 and 15 days from China and Asia to Europe and the US East Coast, and 3,000 miles on that journey. So a significant cost environmental saving. The prices may not come down as quickly, as insurance costs will still remain high for those vessels transiting through the Suez. On the right, you can see this blue line at the top represents these future potential Arctic routes to the Netherlands from the Far East. As global warming kind of progresses, these are becoming more and more viable. And there was thought that 2026 might be the first time, summer 26 might be the first time we'd be able to exploit these. And some vessels are, but they tend not to be containerized vessels, which is what your books move in. But in the next couple of years, this is something that we do need to keep an eye on. A final key slide really today is just to make you aware of some changes coming into play in July this year from the Consumer Product and Safety Commission, CPSC. They are just really ramping up the enforcement of their existing regulation and changing the way that you have to file and report on your own products. Now it has to be electronic. Most books are okay, but children's books very likely classified as children's products and do have some CPSC filing requirements. It's quite complex, but there's a lot of help and advice online at the CPSC website, and we'd be happy to help you try and navigate those as well. But it's definitely, if you're a publisher of children's books, it's definitely something that someone needs to be looking at sooner rather than later. And finally, my final slide, just around the temporary government shutdown. At the moment, we're not expecting any huge delays as a result. CBP are still operating as usual, but other government associations such as the Food and Drug Administration or Fish and Wildlife, or indeed CPSC, may be experiencing some delays. So another reason to start your CPSC filing investigation sooner rather than later, because they might be a backlog resulting from this temporary shutdown. Slightly over my minutes, but that's it for me. Thank you, Ken.
I think I'd like to invite Elizabeth Bartheld from Sylvamo to bring her slides up and to kind of bring us up to speed with some of the things that are happening in the paper market.
Great, thank you so much. So just want to thank the Book Industry Study Group for having me back. I really appreciate it. As Brian said, I'm going to discuss issues affecting the paper manufacturing industry and supply chain. But first, let me start with a quick snapshot of Sylvamo. So we're a $3.8 billion global paper company focused on uncoated free sheet. So that's the paper used for office papers, commercial printing, and books. Our workforce includes almost 6,500 employees operating safely around and reliably across manufacturing and commercial teams. We run 7 mills across 3 continents, giving us a diversified supply footprint and strong geographic reach. This scale gives us stability and reliability for our customers in a volatile global market. These are our locations, our U.S. locations. We have a mill in Ticonderoga, New York, and Eastover, South Carolina. And our global headquarters is in Memphis, Tennessee. So I am going to talk a little bit about tariffs because I don't think any presentation can be done without tariffs these days. But obviously, they directly impact your input costs, lead times, and general certainty. So these are a quick overview of tariffs that are important for the paper supply chain specifically. So there's a section 232 on timber and lumber last year. Good news here is that paper was not included in the investigation. We'll continue to monitor, but at this stage, we don't expect direct impact on printing and communication papers unless it could happen in the inclusions process. There's a 232 on industrial machinery. This one is to be watched closely. The administration is reviewing tariffs on industrial machinery, and pulp and paper equipment could fall under this umbrella. So if tariffs are imposed, it could raise the cost of equipment purchases or upgrades over time, but it doesn't really directly impact the paper supply chain. So we expect a decision in the first or second quarter of this year on the 232 on industrial. There's an investigation, a Section 301 investigation on Brazil. So Brazil, of course, is a major supplier of wood, pulp, and paper. So any Section 301 investigation can have downstream effects. The U.S. could release the report in the first quarter, but it is due in June. Jack already talked a little bit about IEEPA. There's a separate IEEPA on Brazil. So there's the 10% reciprocal tariffs and a 40%, I'll call it a free speech tariff. Those have, of course, impact supply chain and fiber flows. We hope the Supreme Court will issue a decision soon. Pulp is exempt from the 40%. Paper is not. And then finally, the EU-US trade framework, the 15% on several EU imported goods into the US. And then finally, USMCA, so the United States, Canada, Mexico agreement. We'll see how discussions go along with those. The US and Mexico have had some form of an agreement recently for how to work that trade agreement. As Jack said, Canada is in a different place. So let me go to the next slide and bring up a new topic for you all. EPR, and that's the acronym. It's called Extended Producer Responsibility. It's an environmental program that shifts some of the end of life of management costs for packaging and in some cases printed products back to companies placing those products on the market. So why are we doing this, or why are states doing this? EPR aims to improve recycling outcomes and reduce landfills by making producers help fund the collection, sorting, and processing for recycling. Instead of municipalities bearing the entire cost, brand owners or importers pay fees into the system. These fees are then used to upgrade recycling programs. For publishers, this can translate into reoccurring fees tied onto the packaging you use, cartons, mailers, protective wraps, rather than your bound books that are exempt in many jurisdictions. So the fees are typically based on material type, weight, and recyclability. That's called oftentimes eco-modulation. So lighter, more recyclable packaging usually costs less. As I said, bound books are frequently exempted, but not universally. Some programs do capture catalogs and magazines and inserts depending on the definition. For us, copy paper is sometimes included. You can expect annual reporting on placed on the market volumes and invoices from the program operator. So who pays? So in most EPR laws, the brand owner is responsible if the brand owner is outside the country, and the importer takes the responsibility. However, again, depending on how it enters a state, it is branded or unbranded packaging. The manufacturer, the retailer, or the distributor could also be the obligated producer to pay. Who runs these programs? So usually the legislation will set up a producer responsibility organization or a PRO. So producers join the PRO and handles the registration, fee collection, and the system for the recycling improvements. The Pro will provide material lists, reporting templates, audit guidance, and fee schedules. So this is a mature program in the EU and Canada. The US state programs begin phasing in 2021, with broader obligations ramping up over the next few years. This shows what states currently have fees and programs in place. We at Sylvamo started paying fees in Oregon this last year, and in Colorado. California is packaging only, but there's still some fees that we'll need to pay upcoming. Same for Maine. And then Maryland, Minnesota, and Washington are other states with EPR. We really advocate to try to get paper excluded from these programs. Helps reduce the costs of the programs on us. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide highlights two major policy areas where Sylvamo and the broader printing and publishing ecosystem are actively pushing back against government action to reduce paper demand. Both issues directly affect mail volumes, print marketing, and long-term health of the paper-based communications channel. So first-class stamps have increased 42% since 2021, with another increase planned for July of 2026. These rapid above-inflation increases have made it more expensive for publishers, marketers, nonprofits to reach audiences through the mail. We're working with coalitions across the mailing and paper industries to advocate for limits on the Postal Service's pricing authority. The 2020 regulatory changes at the Postal Regulatory Commission gave the Postal Service more freedom to raise rates, and the result has been a significant erosion in mail volumes. We support legislation that would restore accountability and require the Postal Service to operate in a manner that protects affordability and competitiveness of the mail system. The other issue is what we call paper options. So we're opposing federal efforts that makes digital the default for key financial documents. So a bill recently passed the House that would allow companies to automatically force consumers into digital delivery unless they proactively opt for paper. There's a similar proposal before the Security and Exchange Commission. So we're advocating for a balanced approach that preserves consumer choice and ensures accessibility for senior and rural areas and recognizes the continued importance of paper communication. So any move to make digital the default sets a precedent and could influence future policy debates around paper-based educational materials, government notices, and even printed product information. So let me take you to the final slide. So let me close by pulling together key messages. So across all the issues we covered today, government decisions are having a growing impact on the paper industry, and we're actively advocating to protect print, preserve consumer choice, and help the paper supply chain remain stable. So thanks for having me here today, and I appreciate the chance to share these updates. And I value our partnership with the publishing community and will happily take any questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And we'll come back to questions in a few minutes after we hear from both Rachel and Matt. Rachel, COMERFORD, could you just bring up your slides and we'll talk a little bit about accessibility, particularly in the US market?
Of course. I will try to keep this brief. So this is just a quick 5-minute overview of what's going on with the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, and Title II update. A reminder that I always give when I give one of these presentations, despite my father's best efforts, I am not a lawyer. He'd love to channel my argumentativeness, but instead I'm here. So nothing here is considered legal advice. So Title II, this time it's personal. The Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act requires that state and local governments ensure that all programs and services are accessible to people with disabilities. The update came with a deadline this time. So if the population served by the public entity is 50,000 people or more, then the deadline for compliance is April 24th, 2026. For fewer than 50,000, it's April 24th, 2027. And then there's a special district exception as well, which goes to April 24th, 2027. So the way that this changed is that the DOJ clarified that digital content and services are explicitly included within Title II now. That means that accessibility is going to apply to websites, platforms, documents, media, digital publications. If a public entity is providing it, it must be accessible. What accessible means, and this is like a very high level overview. It has to be usable by people with disabilities. It has to be compatible with assistive technology, and it has to be accessible without any special permission or retrofit. It'll apply to websites and apps, to ebooks, to multimedia and interactive content, assessments, learning platforms. And the standard that's being used as the baseline are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's also known as WCAG or WCAG or however you want to pronounce it. Version 2.1, level AA. So this is sort of the industry standard for accessibility guidelines. It's broken down into 4 parts. Each part has a series of requirements. The first is just that everything is perceivable, that there's text alternatives, captions. The second is that it's an operable interface, so you can use a keyboard to access it. You can use other assistive technology to access it. The third is that it's understandable. So there's headings marked up as headings. You can easily navigate through content. And the last is that it's robust. So it comes in formats that work with multiple assistive technologies. But Rachel, I'm not a government entity. Well, you might be, I don't know. I don't know who's on this call. But Title II doesn't regulate publishers directly, but it regulates a lot of our customers and our partners. So when your content, your platforms, your services, when they're used by these public entities, like a public school district, like a public university, like a public library or archive, that means that it becomes a contractual and operational requirement to provide accessible materials. And what we're seeing from all of these public sector partners is that they're requiring more from their vendors. They want more accessibility documentation, including what's known as a VPAT, which is the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. It's also, that's the template that gets filled out. Once it is filled out, it's called an ACR. They want clear ownership and remediation paths. They want to know if something isn't accessible, what are you doing in order to make it accessible? What's your long-term plan? What's your roadmap, your timeline? And who's fixing this? Who are you working with in order to get it done? And they want to know more about maintenance. Accessibility isn't one and done. You can't just finish your accessibility work and say you're 100% and everything is complete. Every time that you introduce a change or new content, it requires more testing, it requires more updates. So why does this matter to the publishing supply chain? Because even if it doesn't regulate publishers directly, the public institutions are responsible for the accessibility of the products that they use. As a publisher, I can tell you that we are seeing an increased number of requests from schools for things like indemnification, where they want the publishers to take legal responsibility for the accessibility of the content. So the responsibility tends to flow upstream to publishers, to platform providers, to conversion vendors, and to distribution and hosting partners. And what that means for the publishing companies and other vendors in the process is that accessibility can be created or it can be broken at virtually any stage of the process. You can introduce errors or problems during the authoring and design phase all the way through to the QA phase. But you can also take responsibility at each stage for testing, for clarifying what needs to be accessible and what doesn't, and for making sure that by the time you reach your QA stage, you're dealing with minimal problems. I should clarify before I go into like the overall takeaway for this is that this has come up frequently. Private entities are not covered by Title II. They're covered by Title III of the ADA. But private businesses that act on behalf of a public entity, so if it's a contractor providing services, Title II obligations do apply. On the university side, this has come up frequently in conversation. Public and private colleges and universities have to provide equal access to post-secondary education for students with disabilities. So Title II of the ADA covers the publicly funded universities, the community colleges, and the vocational schools. Title III of the ADA covers the privately funded schools, and then all public or private schools that receive federal funding are required under Section 504, sorry, of the Rehabilitation Act to make their programs accessible to students with disabilities. So high level, this means that there's a broader shift in the accessibility requirements. It's no longer a niche. It's going to be a lot harder to say that there's one person who's taking care of accessibility across your organization. It means a proactive approach to making content and platforms accessible instead of waiting for someone to ask for it. It means that we are going to have to implement systems and user paths that integrate accessibility instead of having one line of code that fixes everything, or that one person that you contact if everything doesn't work for them. And it means that the supply chain partners are a part of that legal equation, even if a private entity is not covered by Title II. Title II is likely to impact their business, and it will likely impact their reputation and sustainability. That's it.
Thank you, Rachel. And not last and not least, I'd like to bring up Matt Baldwin. Matt's been a partner in providing updates on regulatory changes, particularly in the EU and European market for the Book Manufacturers Institute over the last few years. And we're lucky to have him here today. Matt, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. So a little update from this side of the pond and from our dear friends in Brussels, who've been thinking up lots of regulations over the last few years to keep us amused. First of all, EUDR, and then a few words to GPSR. So first of all, EUDR, everyone's probably familiar with it, given the drama we've been going through the last couple of years. European Union deforestation regulation. Born out of some very noble goals to limit the impact of deforestation on our planet. However, as Milton Friedman said, when a government often has a solution to a problem, it's usually worse than the problem. And this has been exactly the case here. So whereas a very noble idea of battling deforestation, the execution, to put it mildly, was incompetent. So the regulation was originally voted through in May 2023, and it was to apply December 24. We went through 15 months ago the same kind of drama as we did at the end of last year. It was delayed once, and then alas, it's been delayed again. So now the new date for application is December 26. In the last few months of the previous year, there were lots of discussions about how the regulation could be simplified, as they realized that the IT system called Traces that they developed to support the regulation was found to be lacking. Unfortunately, from many of our points of view, the simplification measures that we were proposing to put through at the end of last year actually made life a lot more complex. And so there was a real panic in the industry about how we were going to be able to comply with this regulation. But there was a collective sigh of relief that I think everyone in the industry heard across the world, and the champagne corks were popping at Christmas as the EU came to its senses, thanks to a lot of lobbying by the Irish Booksellers Association. And they excluded printed books from the final version of the regulation and text. However, that said, it should be kept in mind that the way that they've done this is to exclude HS code 49, so the harmonized system code 49 products. So most of printed books, color books, etc., are indeed excluded. However, any products falling under HS code 48 do remain in scope. So those, for instance, include notebooks, diaries, stationery, if you can think of those kind of paper products which don't have a great deal of printing on them. And of course, paper is still included. So 98% of the industry is indeed reprieved from this horrendous regulation, but there might be some residual exposure for some people. In addition to that, it was agreed that the EU Commission would, by April of this year, look at further simplification measures. But quite frankly, it's unlikely to change the scope of the regulation, and it's more likely to focus on areas of improvement for the way that the regulation will function within the EU. So it's unlikely to significantly impact non-EU actors. Finally, a little bit of a health warning here. So whereas we've had reprieve from EUDR, there are other regulations in the pipe or indeed existing, which are focusing on traceability of products. Notably, you might have heard of the digital product passport. This is an EU regulation to provide greater transparency about product details, the materials, the origin of materials used to produce them. And whereas at the moment products such as books are not encompassed within the scope of this regulation, it's anticipated that they're going to make it a wider scope as time goes by. And we might well find as we head towards 2030 that we have to go back to the same kind of traceability data as EUDR was requiring for books. Also, the UK has been mentioning for a number of years that they would bring out their own equivalent of the EUDR. Have been very, very quiet on the topic, undoubtedly waiting for all the mess to play out in EU before moving forward with that. So next slide. This regulation, GPSR, General Product Safety Regulation, did indeed come into force as planned on the 13th of December 2024. So you should hopefully, if you have any activities selling products within the EU, you should already be aware of this. Just a little reminder, the main requirements concerning this regulation are to perform risk assessments on your products, to maintain the technical details specification, labeling, and if you're outside the EU, to mandate an EU representative who's the main contact for market surveillance authorities and manage any incident reporting if indeed there were. I think to give you a bit of an update about where we are just over a year in, basically national governments have been focusing on integrating the terms of GPSR within their own national legislation. It's particularly the case with Germany and France. That includes the idea of sanctions. So interestingly, France has come up with a fine system maximum of 600K in fines and up to 5 years imprisonment for continued breach of the regulation or the local legislation. We recently had November last year as well some guidance published by the EU Commission, which is useful. If you fancy some bedtime reading, I highly recommend it. There's a link there. They confirm the product range covered by GPSR, which does include non-tangible, i.e. digital products such as ebooks, audiobooks, etc. There has been very, very little in terms of enforcement to date concerning the regulation. In April of last year, there was a sweep which focused, as you can imagine, on more sensitive area of children products, particularly focusing on online platforms such as Amazon. However, there haven't been any sanctions to our knowledge or any fines at this stage. So really, I think in this first year, we've seen adoption within the national government's legislation. We've seen some guidance on the regulation itself. And I think it's probably from now on that we'll start to see increasing amounts of inspection and ultimately potential sanctions to make an example of some serious offenders. But it's more likely they're going to concentrate on the most sensitive areas such as children's toys, etc. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. The Ken, if I could just turn it back to you. I know we've had several questions as well as some that you've been posing as people have spoken. So maybe we start with those.
Perfect. And let me encourage you to add questions to the chat or even come off mute and engage in discussion directly. So Jack, you mentioned a few things that we should be doing about the ACE portals and all the rest. Are there other ways to compensate or plan for or take into account the unpredictability?
Yeah, I think someone put in the question, just plan for multiple scenarios. And I've been on these supply chain committee webinars before where kind of some of the default answers that I've tried to give before as well is, just have multiple suppliers ready, a multiple supplier base and a wide varied customer base. And I appreciate that's much easier to say than it is to enact in practice. Those that kind of general guidance still applies so that you are not hit overnight with something unpredictable. And that's something that we saw last year and this year that had never really been seen with tariffs specifically before, was how they were implemented, with zero notice. That was something that had never really happened before in kind of trade history. So yeah, not being too reliant on a specific trade route for either supply or customers is one. And then the second, like you mentioned with the ACE portal, is just being on top of what you can be on top of, control your controllables and put yourself in the best possible scenario, because there is plenty that is outside of our control. But yeah, controlling what you can with ACE, registering with ACE being one, filing these protests and post summary corrections for your existing entries being a second thing that you can do.
When people are doing that, I'm imagining calling up my general counsel or my CFO or somebody saying, we need to do this sort of stuff. Are you seeing that happening in supply chain or GC, or like where in the companies are people doing this?
Yeah. Just yesterday, actually, and we're seeing, again, supply chain kind of work its way up towards the board level in ways within our customers that it tends not to. Just yesterday from a large customer, not in the publishing industry, but we've got requests for weekly, monthly, and quarterly kind of business reviews and the quarterly ones are, with members of their board, like the chairman of their board to be included. And these are, a kind of a multi-billion-dollar global company. So the trade has worked its way up the echelons within our customer base as well.
Have you seen any good way to, you mentioned the secondary hit, like companies that do business with Iran or Cuba or Venezuela or whoever, Greenland, whoever it happens to be. Have you seen any good way to track that, to know what, like a list of watch out if you do business with these countries?
No, with Iran specifically, there's been no kind of published list. And this is, a trade policy that's so far only really been announced on Truth Social, no further than that. So our advice here would be take your guidance from official CBP sources, and these things don't come into force until they're published in a Federal Register update, not on a social media site. You can do some desktop research and see who trades with Tehran, and it's a lot of like big manufacturers out there. China, Turkey, are two on there, for example, that where a lot of publishing printing is done. If this did go ahead in the Federal Register, we would expect them to release a list, but until that point, no, I'm afraid not.
And India seems to be like close to the list and then off the list and then close to the list. It's really moving around a lot.
Yeah, I think that announcement came just after I sent my slides over to Brooke yesterday. They announced the reduction in India tariffs. So yeah, unpredictable as always.
So I don't know who would address this best, but I've been hearing about threats to USMCA, and likely if our negotiating position stays constant, which of course is constantly variable, we're not going to know until like the very end on whether those tariffs and like what's going to happen with Canada in that agreement or Mexico.
Yeah, so it's due to be renewed in July this year. I think for another 15 or 16 years or something is the kind of the next cycle. It was spoken about quite a lot at the Davos World Economic Forum meeting last week or the week before, especially within the context of Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney's speech around, pivoting towards a stronger ties to China and things like that. One of the kind of retaliatory threats was, be careful, we're, USMCA is up this summer. So it's kind of some of these vague threats at the moment. I've not seen anything serious written that suggests USMCA is going to completely go away, but I also wouldn't confidently say that it's going to be renewed as is until the day that it's signed, to be honest.
Well, that was the thing that kind of saved us for paper and for books, right? Because they were covered under USMCA.
Yeah.
So one thing to add on to that too is I think it's clear from the US government perspective that they would much prefer bilateral as opposed to an agreement between the three. To that end, the US and Mexico have started formal discussions. That was announced last week or the week before, focusing on rules of origin, critical minerals, and some trying to align on dumping in both regions. But Canada, there's been no announcement of any formal discussions, and I don't see that changing in the near future. So US-Mexico seems to continue to move forward. There's certainly large issues to be dealt with, but I don't know when or how Canada gets put back in the mix.
Yeah, and in the spirit of those US-Mexico negotiations, they did actually stop supplying oil to Cuba when that got announced. So that was, I suppose, them offering a concession to the US as part of those negotiations. You're right.
Fantastic. So Elizabeth, on the extended, to make a bridge here, the extended producer responsibility, does that affect internal shipments, say from a printer to a distribution center or from distribution center to retailers, or is it primarily to consumers?
It's to consumers usually. So it's if you're shipping product into Oregon, you should, I'll do the same disclaimer Rachel did.
Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer. You should definitely consult your counsel. But if you have a product that has packaging, paper, plastic base, metal, glass, you are likely included in the EPR program.
How would we think about this if we're shipping to, say, Powell's bookstore or something like that? Would it be on the, how would that work?
So first talk to Powell, see if they're already paying for some of the packaging. Because sometimes could be the retailer for who's paying.
Yeah.
So you can have, the main the Producer Responsibility Organization in the US is a group called Circular Action Alliance. They happen to get all the pro business so far in the US. So can have a conversation with them to see who the obligated producer is, and if the distributor in that case is the obligated producer to pay, or if it's the retailer, Powell's Books. And then it would be, for us as an example, so transit packaging is usually not included. So a big box that has several cartons of reams of paper is not included, but the box that the ream of paper comes in is included. The plastic strap that goes around the ream of box, the ream wrap around the paper, shrink wrap if there's any shrink wrap on it. So there's a form on the CAA website, Circular Action Alliance website, that details each of these product types, and you fill in how much volume you're sending into that particular state. it's quite complex. There's groups out
Sounds
there
like
that can help companies. We've tried to do it all internally just because of the cost. But it has taken a full group, a cross-section group of legal, supply chain, commercial, government relations, to submit this data. We are going to start a LinkedIn group, an EPR group, to try to help answer questions. Again, our legal counsel won't let us answer specific questions, and each fact pattern is going to be different based on the company, but it should help provide resources for folks. And I can share with Brooke some of the resources we have. We have a Sylvamo like EPR resources page. I can send that over to y'all. But again, usually bound books are not included, but you could kind of get tripped up on some of the packaging depending on if there's secondary packaging in with the transit packaging.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Rachel, I'd like to ask you about EPUBs and the various platforms that are used to distribute those, say Kindle or Overdrive's system. There's always been the issue of the content being accessible and the platform being accessible. How does that work backwards to the publisher?
Like most questions associated with accessibility, the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
But to give a little more information, if the player itself is embedded into a learning management system, by the choice of the owner of the learning management system, and I can use Macmillan as an example, we embed a vital source reader into our platform. It is up to us to work with VitalSource and make sure that they're providing us with an accessible platform. They've done a fantastic job so far. If it is the school making the choice to direct students to the platform to purchase books, the school should be directing students to an accessible platform. However, unless they're requiring students purchase from that platform, it gets a little murky.
I recall publishers like trying to push off accessibility requirements by saying, yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, we got a 2-year plan, and the 2-year plan never actually materializes. Are there some of these regulations getting some teeth on this stuff? Or is that still
Yes.
kind of the case?
We are definitely seeing more pushback from universities, not even pushback, but the initial outreach is much more aggressive and clearly delineated in terms of what's being requested. And so we're seeing individual states that are setting up their own legislation regarding fines associated with not meeting these rules. We're seeing baseline indemnification requirements from schools, including them in their contracts. And we're seeing a significant amount of documentation being requested from the start at schools. We're even seeing some schools who are saying you meet these requirements or we do not use your products. For me, there's always a middle ground when it comes to accessibility. I don't believe in a 100% because every person that I know that has a disability has a different experience when it comes to learning, when it comes to using a product. Nothing is ever going to be perfect for every user. But what I do think that you should be looking for when you're looking for partners, when you're looking for vendors, is somebody who has an understanding of what accessibility is. Somebody who's filling out their VPAT or ACR with more information than just meets or does not meet, but has details about what they've tested and how they've tested, and what parts of their content or platform are working for users with disabilities and which ones aren't. Open communication, honesty, those are still the principles on which we trade in the accessibility community. And the more that you have of it, the more, the easier it is to have successful partnerships.
So let me think through this. So a professor decides they want a particular textbook with associated homework platform, what have you.
Mhm.
You could end up getting the adoption, but not get any sales because you can't actually indemnify the school with the platform interconnect, I guess. But there could be like a digital platform that's independent of the school. But if the student's not required, help me sort this out. Like, it's just confusing.
If the student is required to use the platform in the classroom, then the result is that the instructor is required to find a platform, or the school is required to find a platform that is accessible. If it's
Okay.
a recommended platform, again, murky. It's not entirely clear. My argument, because I enjoy a good accessibility fight, is that if you're requiring it as a resource for any student, you're requiring it as a resource for, or you're offering it as a resource for any student, you're offering it as a resource for all students.
Yeah.
So I believe that anything required or recommended should be accessible for the students that are using it.
And it would seem like this is, so you're mostly in the higher ed space, although you've got quite a bit of high school. It would seem
Mhm.
like primary, middle, secondary are also like really going to need to enforce this.
Yeah. And that's where we're seeing a lot of legislation on the state level. Maryland is my favorite example to point to. They've implemented legislation that has a $5,000 fine for your first violation of the accessibility laws and a $10,000 fine for your second one. They also require indemnification for vendors. So if there is a charge to the school based on a lawsuit, then that charge is then shifted over to the vendor that was responsible for providing the content or providing the platform. It's getting very, very serious. And this has been coming for a long time. So anybody that missed it, I'm sorry. But it's definitely, there's teeth now.
Good. Well, thank you. I saw something about PPWR. Jenny, you asked about PPWR, and I'm blanking on what PPWR is.
Product packaging.
Ah,
Yeah,
so
sorry,
that's
it's
what,
the new UK regulation that's coming into effect, I believe, in August, and it's regarding the product packaging. So just curious if there's some insight in regards to how that affects distribution and also printers.
great. I think that probably goes to Matt, right?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
I think he means Matt Baldwin.
Matt Baldwin.
Oh, Matt
Yeah,
Ball. Okay.
yeah, like PPWR.
Yeah,
You're off
I
the
have to get
hook.
I have to get back to you on that one, I must admit. You blindsided me there.
Very good. Are there other questions that folks have that I haven't called out or we haven't discussed in adequate detail? I know I missed a few going by, and I'm struggling to find them.
There have been some questions that Rachel's been kind enough to answer in the chat, in particular, talking about whether primary, middle, and secondary schools are included under ADA, and she confirmed that they were, as long as they were public. And I would say that with respect to PPWR, one way to look at it is kind of the extended producer responsibility. It's an attempt to broaden the guidance over excessive packaging, particularly in Europe. So we can do a little bit of work on our side and bring an update back to the full list when we mail out or email out the recording and the materials for this session today.
I did have one more question for Jack. The map showing the Arctic routes was pretty interesting and not something that I'd seen before. But I do remember a section in like the New York Times maybe a year or two ago where they were talking about Silk Road trains as another way to get across Asia. Is that just like something amusing that isn't really practical?
No, they do run, and they run quite frequently from kind of and it works well if your origin supplier in China is located near to a rail terminal. There aren't that many of them, so to avoid kind of long overland trucking, you want to be kind of near one of these few rail terminals. And they do run through kind of into Eastern and all the way through to Western Europe. They do have problems with border, still quite unpredictable at border crossings and things like that. And tracking and visibility from the rail providers is very limited on this route. And our overall experience, we handle a few shipments for clients on this route. Our overall experience is that it rarely works economically because it's about 50% faster than ocean freight, but 100% more expensive. So if something really is that time sensitive, you're probably going to go the 150% more expensive and pay to air freight it. So, if you hit that niche where it works, then it can be a good option. But it has to be kind of quite a unique use case, I would say. But it does exist.
Okay. And the Arctic routes are seasonally.
Yeah. So currently, some of the kind of LNG, the liquid natural gas, and the bulk liquid carriers do use them, and they stick much closer to the Russian land, and they're escorted by kind of Russian icebreakers and things like that, and they can move year round. But they're thinking in kind of 10 to 20 years time that through the summer we may even be able to kind of penetrate straight through go directly over the North Pole and completely cut transit times massively by doing that.
Of course, anybody living at ground level in New York is going to have to move up a floor or two.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There may be other issues associated with that strategy.
That's right.
Yeah. I just want, if I can, Ken, just a further thought to your question earlier about, what other options have we got to kind of deal with unpredictability? We're working with a publisher now who, in conjunction with some of their overseas printers, some European printers actually, they're operating a program where they are shipping excess supply ahead of time to the US, to leverage the kind of the larger print runs, and then paying for kind of as cheap a storage as possible here in the US. And that's a new program that they're doing in response to kind of like tariff uncertainty and not wanting to be caught out by kind of short-term switches in tariffs. So, the idea of kind of on demand, just in time shipping has kind of been thrown up in the air last year or through COVID even, and then through the tariff situation last year. So we are actually seeing people, pay to store goods in the US where previously that had kind of been a last resort.
Supply chain has certainly gotten a lot more interesting over the past few years.
Yeah.
We're running low on time here. Any last questions before we close out?
While you're waiting on that, Elizabeth was kind enough to put in an extended answer on the comparison between EPR and PPWR in the chat. And we'll build on that and give an update when we send out the materials.
Will we include that in some of the Green Book Alliance and other work that BISG has been pursuing?
Yeah, we have a sustainability working group that actually gets together tomorrow, and it'll. I don't know that we may have EPR on the agenda for that, but it's a regular part of both sustainability and the Green Book Alliance.
Great, thank you so much. So Jack, Elizabeth, Rachel, Matt, thank you so much for providing a pretty thought-provoking session today. Really appreciate you speaking to us.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you.
And just a little bit sobering.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.